For years, we thought that, a glass of wine a day, we needed those antioxidants, or that there were certain benefits to different types of alcohol. And the reality is that there is no safe amount of alcohol to drink for your body. It affects you in every cell of your body, in every one of your vital organs.
When people were drinking in the office at 6 p.m. and I'd be like, see you later, guys. Instead of going to the office to have a drink, I'd be going off to do cardio dance or strength training. And they would kind of make fun of me, like lovingly, kindly.
Psychedelic healing is so profound if done the right way, right? And so you have such integrity that you have gone through training and you know how to hold space for someone and know how to facilitate that. Psychedelics can be a really great way to do that as long as you have clear intention and clear uses for that.
I've watched this unfold in various events and with friends that are like, I have a drink and then I am my biggest and brightest self. And I think that that's like the interesting dynamic that we're opening the door to, which is like, but are you really?
This is willpower.
Oh yes, Austin, Texas. We are cracking open a different kind of liberation here in person. The kind that starts when you put the glass down. I'm sitting with Amanda Kuda and unbottling what's real. She's the author of Unbottled Potential, a coach and a force behind the sober, curious movement, helping high-performing humans remember who they are beneath the buzz. And this isn't about like quitting something or alcoholism. It's really about choosing yourself. It's about clarity and courage and the magnetic energy that shows up when your nervous system finally gets to breathe again. We're talking identity, intuition, and what it means to live alcohol-free in a world obsessed with numbing out. So pour yourself some presents and let's get into it. Amanda Kuda, so stoked to sit down. Thank you for being on the Willpower Podcast.
Of course, it's my pleasure.
I'm so happy to have you here and sit and talk about this work. I think the first thing I want to lean in and really just explore with you is tell me about something that's been really challenging in your relationship with alcohol or some challenge you've had in your life and how it really informed the work that you're doing today.
I think the most challenging thing about my relationship with alcohol is that it was unexceptional. There was nothing truly, strange or weird or troubling about my relationship with alcohol. So choosing to end a relationship when there's nothing problematic about it was a really big decision for me, especially, I quit drinking the year I turned 30. And so as a young single woman who is just doing what everyone else is doing socially and drinking and going out and socializing and partying, it felt like a really big ask of myself to decide to quit drinking especially void of a problem. I grew up, my stepmom was an alcoholic, and I got to see that up close and personal, like what it looks like to be truly powerless over alcohol. And I knew that I wasn't that, but I also knew that alcohol was doing something really funky in my mental, emotional, and spiritual life. And I wanted to prove out that theory. And the only way that you can do that is to remove a variable. And for me, that variable was alcohol, and removing it without being someone who could say, I have a problem. Not that that's what I desired, that would have made it easier in some senses, but it was really difficult to do that in a world that tells us you should just keep doing what you're doing unless your life is hitting rock bottom because you're drinking. And that wasn't my story. So it was just kind of taking a chance on myself and this theory that I was developing in my head. And that was really difficult to trust myself in a world that said, keep drinking, you're doing fine, you need this, you deserve this.
Yeah. And I think what's really interesting is when you talk about going back the number of years that when you decided to take alcohol out. And also there's so many tendrils in this conversation because I worked in the alcohol and spirits industry for 15 years of my life, and I've seen it so up close. My stepmother was an alcoholic, or maybe we say she still is. People are always in recovery or whatever the philosophy is there. I don't want to get that right or wrong, but those are challenges. But there is this, if you want to say it, on trend thing that's going on right now. And you and I are also seeing it in the biohacking sphere and the health and wellness community in that world. And I get to see it firsthand even in the psychedelics community because people are really putting booze back on the shelf and backing away from it and quitting drinking, going clean, being straight edge, whatever that might be. Although straight edge probably exude, getting rid of all of the altering substances. But there's so much of that going on right now in this conversation about non-alcoholic bars and spirits. But all of this, it's like you came before it all.
Yeah.
You were doing this when it's like when I was drinking bulletproof coffee and people were like, telling me I was going to die every day at work because I was putting butter in my coffee. I want listeners to hearken back to the era of when people weren't letting go of alcohol unless they were alcoholics. So it was a very cutting edge for you to lean into that at the time that you did. And it must be just wild for you to see the evolution in this direction, and also wonderful for you in some ways.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. You know, when I quit drinking, the whole reason that I do what I do, that I started a business, that I wrote a book about this topic is because the typical entrepreneur story of there wasn't anyone doing the work that I needed when I needed it. And so I remember when I kind of got this itch to quit drinking, I was on this spiritual, emotional, personal wellness journey. And I'd started doing all of these different mindful practices during the week, right? I'm meditating, I'm journaling, I'm reading the books by everyone who's on Oprah's Super Soul Sunday. I am like in it Monday through Friday. And then Friday at 5 o'clock, I am mindless. I am going out to happy hour. I'm going to these, ritzy events with the other who's who of wherever I was living at the time. And I'm just kind of drinking through the weekend, essentially. Sunday fun day, mimosas, whatever. I'm just out with my friends the entire weekend. And I really believed that I needed and deserved those things. And I also truly believed that it was balance. I was doing so well during the week that I deserved this, cut a rug activity on the weekend. And what I didn't realize is that the balance was not there. Everything I did during the week in no way canceled out the damage emotionally and spiritually and physically I was doing to my body on those 3 days of the weekend. And some weekends I was drinking very lightly, some a little more heavily. But the weird thing was that, when I decided I wanted to cut back or quit, there was really no one talking about sobriety outside of the recovery space. Even some of the people who had started talking about going alcohol free, they were still using very recovery-centric, addiction-centric language. And I knew, again, from seeing my stepmom suffer from alcoholism, that that was not me. And so it made it really difficult to figure out, how do I fit into? I know I don't go to AA because it wouldn't feel congruent for me to say, I'm Amanda and I'm an alcoholic and do that whole rigmarole, even though I know that that is such an important path for someone who it resonates with. And for me, I knew that would feel inauthentic. And so I used that as a way to talk myself out of it several times. I'm like, oh no, you don't need to quit drinking. You're not checking these boxes.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. And so then I started looking around for coaches, resources, podcasts. I didn't care, just someone to inspire me to know that I, as a young single woman, could quit drinking and it wouldn't mean social damnation, basically, that I wouldn't all of a sudden be this leper, this outcast that couldn't have friends and was undateable, and I couldn't find anyone. So in my naive mind, I'm like, well, it's just going to be a disaster. Why would I quit? I should just learn to cut back. And I tried that for several months and it just never clicked for me. And so finally I had to decide, even though this isn't popular, even though all of the sources are telling me that AA or recovery or saying I have a problem is the only approach, I'm going to try this other way. And what do you know? As soon as I spoke up about it, there were all of these people who came out of the woodwork that were like, yeah, I feel like that too. Tell me what you did. Tell me about these resources that you've amassed and this method that you kind of walked yourself through to make this feel easier and feel more organic and more authentic. I mean, when I quit drinking, the only non-alcoholic thing you could get was O'Doul's. And that was, if we're working in the industry, that I hope they're not a sponsor. Are they? Great.
No. Sponsored by O'Doul's. No.
It just is not the most elegant experience. And so there weren't even alternatives then. And now we see kind of 2020 moving forward that there are podcasts, resources, books, all of these novelty, non-alcoholic drinks that are really amazing and have really evolved over the past 5, 6, 7 years. And it's just so wild to see how this space has opened up and evolved over the past really handful of years, that now there's all of these options and all of this inspiration and support, and it's becoming a more normalized conversation. And I am braggadocious enough to say that I was on the cutting edge of that. And it feels really cool to have made that decision just from a point of bravery, that there was no one telling me that, hey, you can do this. I just had to decide for myself.
Yeah. And there's like so many things I want to unpack. I want to unpack a little bit of like neurochemistry and toxicity. And I also, for me, I saw probably 6 or 7 years ago, I was in the UK with my friend Martin. Shout out to my friend Martin, who was like, hey, worked with me in the alcohol industry, first for Boddington's beer and then later on in spirits and whatnot, went in the tobacco industry, all of this. And he was a drinker. I mean, like a drinker. And I would never, if you're listening to this, Martin, I love you. You know how much I love you. And also like on the fringes of like, maybe we need to check him in, and he would probably own that in his younger years. And I was like, interested and curious because he was like, oh, there's these clubs, these like non-alcoholic clubs in the UK that were like starting up like social gatherings and stuff before any of it was really being talked about here heavily. And he was like, I'm gonna go do this like 100-day thing. And I was like, okay. And we like chatted intermittently throughout his 100 days. And when he hit day 100, he was like, I feel like things are like so good. Like I'm gonna keep going and see how long this lasts, you know? And that felt really like relevant to me. And I want to get your opinion on this kind of in a moment or two, but because there's also an interesting notion that he was on the fringe, in my opinion, perhaps. Like he could have gone to like an AA type thing or something else. And also he chose to do it through like a social gathering club. It's not for me to really decide. It would be for Martin to decide for himself if he wanted to classify himself as an alcoholic or someone going down that path. And it was interesting to see how well that sort of worked and having a short-term like goal first to see how that transpired. And also the other thing that comes to light, and maybe you can unpack these couple of things, I'm sure you have things to say, is the chart that I use quite often when I'm going to work with clients in a psychedelic space where they're worried about a specific psychedelic. And we can talk about this later in the show if it's of interest. And I show them the chart that shows like toxicity and neurochemistry challenges for long-term effects of specific altering substances. And I show them that because like LSD, psilocybin, and MDMA are on the very, 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 very small end of the slope. They're like literally the three best things on the list, if you will, you know, and the worst offender on the entire list is alcohol by a landslide. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that and the neurochemistry of all that, because that chart, and then even, like Huberman did a primer for a meditation class I was in, Emily Fletcher, who's also been on the show. And he's like, here's my primer for our conversation about like health and focus and science. This was way before he had his podcast. And he talked a lot about his skater friends boozing so hard, and then that being the road to more drugs and addiction to alcohol and then death. And so it's been swirling in the ethers in so many ways. And I'm just not quite sure if people understand how much of the negative effects really land in the body. So I would love for you to talk a bit about whether it's body or brain or being, you know, the effects of booze.
You know, and thank goodness for people like Huberman, who really, you know, his episode on alcohol a couple of years back was like the #1 podcast downloaded for like that entire year because it was so powerful and people needed to hear it. And I think it's so important that people who have a voice and a platform and the education around it are speaking out because, yeah, for years we thought that, you know, a glass of wine a day, we needed those antioxidants or that there were certain benefits to different types of alcohol. And the reality is that there is no safe amount of alcohol to drink for your body. It affects you in every cell of your body and every one of your vital organs, you know, and I'm not a scientist or a doctor. So definitely, if you want more of a breakdown, definitely listen to that Huberman episode. But the long story short is that it screws you up on the cellular level and that your body in most cases can repair from some of that, but it's not instantaneous. You know, like when you're looking at that chart, it's not like, oh, you stop drinking alcohol and in 30 days you feel like butterflies and rainbows are swirling through the ether around you. That's not it at all because your body takes some time to repair and the damage that alcohol is doing is real. And I don't a lot of times like to take kind of a fear-based or a science-based approach because, again, that's not like my strong like suit in the way that I'm interested in. And I really focus on the spiritual effects of alcohol because it definitely affects us in that way. But the really big thing is if you are not feeling good in any way, if you are not feeling your most vibrant, alive, expressed self, then it would behoove you to take a break from alcohol, at least for 100 days, like your friend did. But the real effects that you're going to see aren't going to happen for like 6 or 9 months down the road. And the sad part is that a lot of people will do these short-term cleanses. Like, you know, you mentioned the UK and how that was kind of cutting edge. They were on the cutting edge trend. They're really the group that started the dry January trend. And shout out to dry January. That's how I quit drinking. But if I would have stopped at that 30 days, I wouldn't have really seen any super significant effects. And I think a lot of people are doing these short, quick fix cleanses, or they're maybe only getting to 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. And the real magic happens after your vessel is clear. And so that's going to be different for everyone. But if you imagine you've been drinking, you know, I'll just say, use myself as an example, Monday through Friday, pretty good. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, drinking moderate to heavy. And doing that for well over a decade, your body just doesn't clear itself from that in 30 days. That would be nutso to assume that that is true. So you have to also think about how hard have you been on your body? How does your body process alcohol? And that's different for everyone. And knowing that it's taking a huge toll on you. And so doing some of those shorter term cleanses and thinking that you're going to snap, feel great and perfect, and you're going to sleep like a baby and your skin's going to be clear and all of the great things we read in magazine headlines, a lot of people get frustrated because they don't go long enough and they're like, well, nothing's changed. And my thought is, well, of course nothing's changed. Like,
you just spent 35 years drinking or whatever it is, 20 years drinking every day. Yeah.
Shout out to your friend Martin, who had the wherewithal to go beyond that 100-day point, because for me, that's where I really see the magic happens. And some people after that point will try to like moderate alcohol in, but the sad fact is that they haven't quite yet seen the change yet. So then they're just kind of continuing to have a low level of dullness in their life, when if they would have just stretched it a little further, they might have felt some real tremendous impact and results.
Coming from the alcohol industry, which is so interesting because it's like, if you think about the fact you're working in an office that has all types of alcohol in its cafes and its break rooms and places like that, and also that there's always iterations of the SKUs coming out, the brands or the varietals, if it's wine, and there's things to taste, and there's tastings 3 or 4 days a week, Monday through Friday in the office. And then there are events at night and on weekends, and people are traveling for events, and you're promoting alcohol. And it's like, even in the early days, quite often I say, I had that era of my life, I had enough alcohol for a lifetime, and I rarely drink at all now. I think what's so interesting is in the company culture so deeply that people are drinking all the time. And I was a standout in the office in some way, because people at 5 o'clock would go, even if they were working for another hour or two, would go to the cafe. Everyone would mix up a fancy cocktail or something on the rocks, like the scotch that came out, or the whiskey, the double barrel, something, and go sit at their desk and have a drink with it, or drink in that meeting that was after 5 o'clock. And that felt very like, John Draper or whatever.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, and also it's so normalized in that setting, in that atmosphere. And the other thing is, all of our budgets and all of the alcohol that's in our lives it doesn't cost anything, right? And so then it becomes like it's promotional. And I knew there was like a piece of me that was like, something about this is funny, in 2 eras in my alcohol career, which was when people were drinking in the office at 6 p.m. and I'd be like, see you later, guys. Instead of going to the office to have a drink, I'd be going off to do cardio dance or strength training, and they would kind of make fun of me, like lovingly, kindly. They had like a candy and junk food drawer in the office, and I had a drawer under that was all like beef grass-fed sticks and all those weird shit. So I was like that weirdo in the office. And even earlier in my career, I worked for Grolsch beer, and it's quite a strong beer. It's like 5% alcohol, and it's a 16-ounce swing top bottle for the old school bottles. And I was tasked with going out to the bars and talking about it, making people, asking people to purchase it, chatting it up, letting them buy me a beer. And in my 20s, you don't have a tolerance for that, and you want to move product. And I would have people buy me like a Grolsch and sit and chat with them for a minute, maybe have one sip, and then I would go into the ladies' room and dump it down the sink and then fill it with water. Like, sorry, not sorry, but I don't want to be shit-faced by the time I get
That's smart of you.
finished with work.
Yeah.
And it felt like a little devious, and it's not exactly, it didn't feel like I'm like, am I in integrity doing this or not? But I was also trying to move product and keep my body safe. And so in the interim of those kind of 2 different periods of my life, I think it's like why, after all the years, it was like, I love events and I love all these things, but is my legacy going to be, I got people less inhibited and partied or celebrated something, which in some ways can be beautiful, but in most ways, it didn't feel like the legacy I wanted to leave, And so there's like that whole trajectory of that industry in and of itself, which is not saying any of those people are alcoholics. It's just on access demand all the time to high quality for the companies. I work for the Fortune 100 best of the best companies. Those people are like, you have 5-star alcohol at your fingertips. And so I wonder what you hear is like resistance from people who meet you, or like, I just told you before we started record that my mom was like, this is interesting. Or like, what do you mean? She's not an alcoholic? Or like, why would she stop? I don't know. I like to have a glass of wine. I don't know what that voice is. Mine was always my mom's voice, but
I know all the impressions I do of my family are not them at all.
I know, it's funny.
But it's what I do. It's so interesting that every industry, every geographic region, they're all going to claim, oh, you don't understand how alcohol works for us. And so that's the restaurant industry, that's sales, that is, the alcohol industry. Everyone has this impression that alcohol is somehow worse in their industry. And I would posit that in the alcohol industry, it probably is quite rampant and quite suggested and recommended as an activity. But it's so interesting that we always have that as an excuse. Well, you don't understand how hard it's going to be for me because this is how it's, marketed to me in the Midwest or in wine country or wherever it is that you live, or because I'm a mom or because I'm single. Everyone has this horrific story that they tell themselves about why they can't quit or why it's going to be difficult. And it's so interesting to listen to these resistance stories that we have because they're all excuses, right, to keep us safe and to keep us stuck in that era. And for me, the excuse was ultimately for me to stay, it was allowing me to stay small because it was a way that I imperceptibly kept myself from being able to excel at my highest level. And when I look back and see that now and realize, oh, it wasn't just a social lubricant or something that was expected or required by my work or by my environment or something I needed to unwind. It was something that I used subconsciously underneath of all that as a tool so that I couldn't be my biggest, brightest self. And when I think about it from that perspective, I don't even know what the question was at this point, but
No, it's okay. It's like,
I remember that. What are the other excuses that people give, or the misconceptions that people have? And I think that that's one of them, that we're drinking only because I like the taste, or only because it's a social lubricant, or only because, I want to take the edge off. And underneath of all of it, there's always something deeper. But I will tell you, the excuses and the perceptions of what it is to be sober are still pretty unbelievable. I remember I did a podcast with a pretty prominent podcaster a few years ago and it never aired. And I'm like, that's really strange. I wonder why she never aired it. But then I remember the conversation that we were having, and she really, really wanted me to talk about alcoholism and it being problematic. And I'm like, that's not the work that I do. I help people who are regular, everyday, average drinkers quit drinking. And I could just sense that there was something that irked her about that, because then that meant I was talking to her. And so that episode never aired. And I always just thought it was so interesting that someone, she's, in the wellness and self-help space, but also not surprising, was so caught off guard by the conversation. And so, and that's how we feel, because it's like we're taking away something that we want to make right. It's a tool. It's a pacifier. It's something that is a reward for us. And
it's also this thing that you said, which is like you just said a few moments ago, I was holding myself back from being my biggest and brightest self. And I think that there are many people, and I've watched this unfold in various events and with friends, that are like, I have a drink and then I am my biggest and brightest self. And I think that that's like the interesting dynamic that we're like opening the door to, which is like, but are you really?
Yeah, that's how I get into my creative, zone or meet people. And the reality is that if you cannot do those things without alcohol, then you're just cheating your way through it. It's like bowling. Have you ever gone bowling with a kid and you put the bumpers up?
Yeah.
And like,
last week, because I'm a sake bowler.
No, I know. I still need them too. But if you bowl with the bumpers up, of course you're going to bowl strikes and feel like you're a badass bowler. And that's what it's like to drink for social, to bring out your bigger side. You're just cheating. And you're not allowing yourself to do that authentically. You're not doing it with bravery and courage. And that took a lot of balls for me to admit that to myself, because I too was the life of the party when I was drinking. I too came out of my shell, and I realized, wow, the real test is, can I still do that without this support system, without this cheat code? And in some cases, in most cases, yes. And in some cases, I realized, oh, that is not me. The person who I was becoming is not me. It's who I thought I should be to be good, right, and popular. And that was also a powerful realization too, that maybe that was just me putting on a show and that's not my authentic self. And realizing that alcohol is actually keeping us from being that at our truest level is pretty impactful and a pretty big mindset shift.
Yeah. And like something about blunting the actual connection you can make. I do so much work, and I've been doing so much in the breath space, in the cold water space, in the nervous system space, about people really getting to know themselves, doing like the YPOers would call it, like talking about the last 5%. So really unpacking things that are deep-seated truths in our deeply authentic self, where we're not talking about like, oh, my flight's at 4 p.m. We're talking about, my son was just diagnosed with this disease or this issue, and we're like being emotionally connected to other people in our vulnerability, right? And finding that 5% vulnerability. And I think there is a notion, I think, when you're younger, of you being like, well, I can be a little bit more vulnerable if I am drinking, because it's actually blunting my
filter,
my inhibitions, to be like, okay, what's going to happen? So what happens with the next part of the puzzle, like how we get to the place where we are evolving? This is probably, my opinion, but also think this is relatively aligned with what we're talking about. How do I get to the next part of my challenges as a human being, which is like, what's actually holding me back from being my truest self? If I'm using alcohol as a buffer, then how do I overcome that? Right. And this is a hard conversation to have in some ways, just because there will be people that are listening. They're like, I want to have 1 glass of wine a week. And that's just like hard and fast where I am. And as a health coach, I encourage when I'm working with women one-on-one, or men or women or whoever, and I do a lot of 6-month container work, probably in similar ways to how you are coaching. And Amanda is coaching, so you don't have to do this alone. But those people in that container, as just from a health and wellness perspective, and I'm not coaching specifically anything of what you're coaching, I'm saying to them, hey, I think the win here is us making a commitment about taking alcohol out of the mix. Now, some clients sometimes will say, it's not a possibility. It's a hard no. And I'm like, okay, this isn't what they've hired me specifically for. So then we have a negotiation about 2 bottles of wine a week or whatever their thing is, right? We find a number that works and I get them to commit and adhere to it. But I will say, I want to say 9 out of 10, but like 10 out of 10 of the times the people actually take alcohol completely out of that 6-month container. Number one, they don't always keep it out forever, but number one, they're drinking less after. And number two, their success metrics are way higher.
So much better. So much better.
So much better for that period of time.
I mean, and if you're doing something where you're trying to heal something within your body, so like just as a broad example, if you have an immunodeficiency and you're like, you've thrown spaghetti at the wall to figure this thing out, but you haven't removed alcohol, something that affects you again at the cellular level, every single organ in your body, and you haven't removed this substance that changes how everything interacts with one another, you're just taking 2 steps forward and 3 steps back with anything that you try. I know that it can feel like, oh, you're taking away like my security blanket, my one last vice or whatever it is. And I guarantee we all have a vice hiding behind our next vice. So you'll find something else. But it can feel super confronting, especially in that health and wellness space where it's like, I have this diagnosis or this thing that I'm burdened with, and now I have it forever and I can't drink. Like, thanks a lot, Kristin, for giving me that suggestion. It can feel like a punishment. And if you were to do it as part of whatever healing that you're taking part in, I know that it will accelerate it and make it happen more quickly, more profoundly, more clearly than if you try to keep drinking just a little bit. Because it even another podcast that I really like that talks about this on a more scientific level, and I've read the studies that they quote, but I can't call them up right now, is a podcast called This Podcast Will Kill You. And they talk about alcohol and the level at which, the percentage at which you have to drink for it to start really affecting you. And it's like a tablespoon, that once you have that much alcohol, that your body starts operating at 100% capacity to get rid of the alcohol. So instead of focusing on digesting your food or healing your immunodeficiency or healing your gut or whatever else your body is intended to focus on, it's like, nope, divert attention over to this thing. We got to do that first. And if you're doing that every day or every week, you're diverting your attention away from the other vital processes. Yeah, of course you're not going to heal as quickly, but we don't want to hear that, right? We just kind of want to, and I get it, because I am fortunate enough that I don't work with people who I have to convince. I have people coming to me who are already convinced. They're like, I want to do this. I know my life is going to change, but just give me the steps and show me how. Give me some tools, some encouragement, some guardrails. Help me to figure out what's beyond this. And that's my zone of genius in this work. So you have a real struggle when you're asking people to do it just as kind of a supplement, because they don't want to.
They don't know it's coming.
Yeah.
And I'm always like, hey, I'd rather have you have the treat once a week, chocolate cake, rich, gooey, sugar filled, because at least it's carbohydrates that I can work into your workout schedule, like it's your pre-workout the day before with the 20, where you're like lifting hard or lifting heavy and using some of that carbohydrate load for glucose for the training versus something that's like alcohol, right? So there's that big differential. But yeah, and it's like, the people who are coming to you and you're giving a lot of these skills to, I'm assuming some of them are also really needing the accountability of having someone to check in, because talk about a little bit what it's like for people. Like, some people must come to you that don't have the support system still, about like their friends or their family or their,
most people don't.
How's that showing up for a lot of your clients?
Well, because alcohol is so just rampant in our culture, and because there's still this underlying predisposition that in order to quit, you should have a problem. Otherwise, you just figure it out. There's this kind of double bind that people are in. So they believe that their friendships will wither, and most of them aren't lucky enough to have a friend who is doing something similar. Some people do, and even with that, they still need a little bit of additional accountability and support because it's a dependency-causing substance, even if you're not addicted. And the reality is it changes the way that you make decisions and handle adversity. So I think that the thing people need the most help with is, yes, the social thing and overcoming some things here and there, but usually that's kind of some hacks and quick fixes and some pep talks that we can do rather quickly. It's really the piece of the puzzle is how do you deal with your emotions when you're not numbing anymore and you have to feel them at full force? And people need tools and support around that because even if you're not a huge drinker, the reality is that most people of our age did not grow up getting the tools to learn how to emotionally regulate, you know? And so even if you were handed the best case scenario, you probably still don't have a ton of those skills. So really learning how to acknowledge an emotion, understand that it's okay to feel that emotion and to feel the enormity of it, no matter if it's extreme, tremendous joy, because let me tell you what, that's actually a really messed up problem that we have is that most of us don't have the capacity for joy, let alone pain. And so we're living somewhere in the middle and they need someone to expand them to be able to feel both that tremendous joy and success and elation and love and also grief and heartbreak and all of the emotions that come with it. And that's one of the biggest pieces of my work is to really work through that, but then also to offer tools and support around any situation where you would have used alcohol as a buffer before. And in our society, it's a pretty broad blanket there. So you got in a fight with your partner, you had a stressful day at work, someone flipped you off in traffic, you have to have a difficult discussion, your mother-in-law is coming in for the weekend, like you name it. There's all these situations that are very intricate that we don't realize we were drinking through. And so there's always this excuse coming up and it's figuring out, okay, how do I navigate that? But also how do I build up a resilience in my system to where I can navigate it with more ease down the road and not need someone to hold my hand or support me. And I think it's such an honor to like walk with someone on that journey and figure out how to help them have basically self-trust. And these are powerful people. These are not, sheepish people who can't have a conversation or can't stand up for themselves. These are powerhouse individuals who just have not had boundaries, self-trust, high self-worth, they're people pleasers, they're self-abandoners, and really getting them to stand with a firm backbone and not need alcohol to soothe themselves through something or to make right their decision to abandon themselves and do something that they should do or other people want them to do is a huge undertaking. And so there's all of this like layered intricacies under just removing alcohol. And I would say that in the work that I do, really removing alcohol is a small portion of the conversation for women who have decided like, yes, I'm done with this thing. Most of the stuff we talk about is that emotional level. And then also most of the people who come into my world have this vision, have this dream that there is something more for them, that they personally, professionally, in whatever area of their life, and probably in many areas, that there has to be more than what they're doing right now. And they really want to stretch to whatever that is. And so to have someone hold that vision with you and for you until you can hold it for yourself is also a really important part of the work that I do. So I know that's kind of a broad statement.
No, but it's so great because it's the reminder that it's like really not just about the booze. It's about what's on the other side of it as like the flower is blooming, right? You're like, what's going to happen? What color is it going to be? How am I going to feel? And I think the other thing I want to address for like listeners is I imagine that there's someone listening to this right now that's like, this sounds like it could be cool or I'm interested in this, but like, my quote unquote partner will never go for it. Or like, how am I going to deal with the confronting piece that my partner's going to sit around and drink and like make fun of me or what? And I'm sure that like, it's not always going to be exactly that way, but I think that we do so much in community, yes, but also when we're home with our family, our partner, our lover, that's like a big piece of how we go out, what we do, and of course I feel like all the people I'm going to be around and dating or like going to social saunas and cold plunging it, but that's still like a fringe, there's still so many people out there that are like, how do I do this with my partner? Are you seeing a lot of people like quit in couples or, you know what I mean? Like that to try to sort of bolster the movement for their health?
I think that is the ideal that you and your partner would do it together. But the reality is that's very codependent, right?
Yeah.
You can't make every decision you make based on whether your partner is going to do it or not. And that's their problem, not yours. So I very rarely have encountered a situation, and I write about this in my book too, where I give a lot of tips for people in relationship or who are seeking a relationship and feel like this is like the liquid bond that brings them together, which is absolutely not true, by the way. But you have to get right with yourself, right? You have to make this decision for yourself. And sure, it would be so great if your partner would cut back or quit with you, but unless they're being volatile to your decisions, so if they are, you mentioned like making fun of you or peer pressuring you or pouring you a drink and bringing it to you, even though you've said you're not, then that's their thing. And they get to figure out what their relationship with alcohol is. You have to be steadfast and curious enough in your own desire to quit to know that you just have to make that decision, and you have to kind of grip down and decide, I'm going to do this even though my partner might be doing something different. And what I typically find is that that's a huge fear that we have, that, our relationship will be ruined if we don't have this thing that brings us together, or it'll be awkward, or I won't be able to do it if my partner doesn't do it with me. And the reality is that most people have a supportive partner, and your partner wants you to succeed, hopefully, if they are a good partner. And so they're going to encourage you. And that what I tend to see is that even if they don't do it immediately, usually you being an example of what it's like to drink less, what it's like to feel better, what it's like to self-express at a higher level will kind of start to have a trickle-down effect. And I've seen a lot of partners a year or two down the road cut back significantly or take a break or quit altogether. And it's just like you can't browbeat them into it, right? They have to want to do it.
You can enroll them for supporting you and hope that they're a supportive partner.
Exactly. And that often just you setting a positive example and not rubbing it in or trying to convert them is going to subconsciously convince them to make a change. Of course, I can't promise that, but that's a lot of the time what happens.
That's cool to hear. I think the book is a very good place for people to start, right? If they're like, where do I start? I don't know. And of course, they can always like call you and be like, hey, tell me what all the deeper dive pieces are of this. And I just would love for you to talk a little bit about like maybe the highlights from the book that you feel like, oh, this was a section that really landed and resonated with people. Maybe you didn't even know was going to resonate so much, or, things that were like maybe even scary for you to be like, I'm inking this and saying it out loud to the whole public. How's this going to land?
Yes. And thank you for asking, because it was such a lifetime goal to get a book deal and publish a book and write a book and share my words and have it influence people. And the book is called Unbottled Potential: Break Up with Alcohol and Break Through to Your Best Life. And I really think it's a sobriety book unlike any other, because it's not focused on why alcohol is bad, wrong, or evil, or the science behind alcohol and how it's ruining your body, which again, I think is important. But what is the potential you have in your life if you were to remove this one tiny, seemingly insignificant habit? And I really detail out how it's going to help you spiritually, romantically, emotionally, socially, professionally, and how it's probably put a little bit of a shroud or a cloud over each of those areas of your life that you don't even see. And, this morning I just woke up actually to someone who had tagged me in a little review that they wrote. And I just was crying and sobbing as I'm doing my little morning ritual, because it is so powerful to know that sharing your story and sharing your perspective and sharing a process that you went through is helping other people and continues to do so in perpetuity while you're sleeping, right? And the thing that I really wanted to get across to people is that if you are someone who has a normal relationship with alcohol and you're feeling like it's in some way holding you back, you are probably right. And it is your moral imperative to explore that and discuss it with yourself and to get curious about it. Because if you don't, you're always going to wonder, what could I have done? And I really want to paint the picture of, this is what I think you could do. This is where I think you could excel more. This is where I think you could step more fully into your potential. And if you are someone who has big dreams and big goals and really cares about your well-being and just leaving some sort of legacy in your life, even if that's not like Mother Teresa level legacy, your own level of that I think that the book will resonate. And the parts that I think that have resonated the most, which is really important to me, and I think that this crosses over into the work that you do so much, especially with breathwork and psychedelics, is how it affects you on the spiritual level, really. And, I always say that we inherently have a connection to spirit. And when you ingest alcohol, it's like you're trying to get that connection to go through in a tunnel with a cell phone from 1995. And it's just going to be crackly. But if you remove this barrier that alcohol creates, all of a sudden you are a clear vessel for intuition, for manifestation, for so many of the experiences, the spiritual experiences that we read about and that we want to have. And I think that that's really the most powerful part for me. And typically I work with women. A lot of the women or individuals who come to my work are doing so because they have this spiritual curiosity as well, and they're seeking for something more out there, whatever that is to you. And they have a sense that alcohol is getting in the way. And if that is like really resonating with you, I think that's really the most important and novel part of the work that I do too.
I want to just quickly touch on like this psychedelic renaissance in the landscape that's happening now, because these are also altering substances, you know? It's like a clear reminder also to anyone who's listening. And I speak about breath, and Finney and Kelly, who's just on the podcast, we talk about intentionality. And a lot of this is like, yes, we have done work and are working with people in that space of psychedelics. And we also know that the predominant thing of you can get high on your own supply, you can breathe yourself into a better intuitive space, you can open yourself up to possibility in a different way without using anything that's going to alter you, right? I think that there's a beautiful notion in that. And now lots of research, and Dr. Richard was on the show and did a whole research piece for his thesis around conscious connected breathing and utilizing it against non-breathing groups to be able to work with anxiety, and really showed some beautiful eradication of the anxiety and people coming back home to themselves and their essence and like just their own capacity by using only the breath. So I say that because I want more and more, as this renaissance continues to grow, where people are really taking a lot of substances or taking alcohol out of their life, or even any altering substances, it's the simultaneous growth of the renaissance of psychedelics. So it's like people want to and need to have self-agency to choose what's right for them.
Yeah.
And their religion and their cultural beliefs and their partnership and all the things. And I want to query what your stance is on some of the psychedelics that we're seeing being used now and this renaissance that's happening today.
Yeah. I think that psychedelic healing is so profound if done the right way, right? And so you have such integrity that you have gone through training and you know how to hold space for someone and know how to facilitate that. And especially in contrast to alcohol, a lot of people who, you know, like myself, I would say misuse alcohol in some way, even if it's not abuse, you're using it to work around or to avoid other things that are within you. And so most of us have some sort of big or little t trauma in our life that could use some healing and that we've avoided looking at. And I think depending upon what that is for you, that psychedelics can, especially, you know, the type of individuals we work with who are also really intelligent, which means you are thus really intelligent about the ways that you avoid your problems. Sometimes it's helpful to bust through that intelligence.
Stop saying it, Amanda. It's awesome.
Yeah, it is like you sometimes are so good at working around it or intellectualizing, you need something to pop that intellectual bubble. Mm-hmm. And psychedelics can be a really great way to do that. So as long as, you know, I'm a proponent for it, as long as you have clear intention and clear uses for that. I think that, you know, we live in Austin, of course, and there's a lot of, I don't know who taught me this phrase, but journey jumping, where you're,
I love that.
Where you're,
I don't love journey jumping. I just love that phrase. Because people are like, I don't need to integrate anything. I just learned in that powerful session I had for 2 days or something. And they're just like, this is my 36th ayahuasca journey this week.
Oh my God, exactly. And that is,
I mean, I'm laughing only because we
something.
see it.
Oh, we see it
for sure. We see it. And it's not just like conscious bro community.
No, it's just, you're just doing drugs.
But it's
just
like,
call it what it is.
Yeah,
You're
it's like a bit more
drugs,
recreational.
right?
I also want to like give some credit to the people who are out there trying to become more conscious and really trying to open themselves up, but don't understand what the path of integration actually does, because there are so many coaches and facilitators out there, just as the world is growing of landscape of facilitation and this hyper growth where not everybody's getting trained to share. The integration is not optional theme. Is like, thank you, Todd Colwitty from Condor Approach, who I've trained with years ago and still love dearly. But the people are out there saying, I want to find the meaning to life, and I'm not giving myself any space between. And that journey jumping thing is really, personally, it's like a few psychedelic journeys in a year is all I can muster to handle for my own body, because in between there's so much to unpack.
Yes. As long as you're doing that work and you have the support mechanisms you need, especially if you are dealing with a bigger T trauma, you know, and I think that as long as you are caring for yourself and being careful, that it can be a really profound mechanism for healing and growth and discovery as well. And so, yeah, I'm a advocate for it as done
intentionally or just like, yeah, I think it's really important to do it with a guide in many ways, or to be as advanced enough that you can have a safe setting in your own home and, you know, do it on your own in a container if you're like, feel like you're skilled in that. I always worry about people who are just, it's just nice to have someone there to hold space for you, even if you're like a pro in some.
Yeah,
in some
you
of
never
our, if
you,
you're a
you never know
therapist
what's going to
already.
come up. Like you
Yeah.
and you deserve that too. You deserve someone to witness you and to be there with you, or to at least be there to talk about whatever you experienced afterwards.
Yeah. I take copious notes. I run AI tracking in the background. So I have notes and then I do summaries and I give people homework and all these things. And I'm just thinking as we're talking, like how this will never happen, but like how interesting back in the day, if we're in our 20s and we're like out boozing, if we had like a sober person with us to sort of write down all the things we were saying and doing and do a summary and saying, here's some homework about the things that came up in your whole binge to your bar crawl. And also how we would see very quickly, I imagine, how bad for us it was. Because I'm not quite sure people are having revelatory experiences. And I don't want to say that that doesn't happen, but revelatory experiences in the same way. We're mostly like, in my life, I'll speak to me, it's like, apart from like the career where I was sipping on alcohol and trying things and whatnot and making assessments or judgments or, judging cocktails or trying to find the perfect balance or something that wasn't about like just drinking. My younger years of drinking were like not cute.
Yeah.
Right. They were like not cute. And I was like I was devolving for sure when I was out and drinking. So if I had like a little coach following me around back then, I would be like mortified probably by my behavior the next day. And then to integrate that would probably be leading me away from drinking so much. So it's interesting to think about how we do it now.
Thank God that social media wasn't at its peak when we were out in those days. I think that could happen now very easily because so much is captured and recorded and whatnot. But yeah, I think that there's something to be learned about who you become when you're drinking, and there definitely could be some unpacking that happens.
Let's just talk about where you see this whole movement of like sober curious or alcohol-free lifestyles going like in the next, 2 to 5 years. And like, what's your hope for this and how people are beginning to explore this more?
Yeah. One of my colleagues, Holly Whitaker, she wrote a book called Quit Like a Woman, and she posits that alcohol is the new cigarettes. And we're going to start to realize like, oh, that ain't good for us. We should not do that. It's gross, in fact, and it's lowbrow. We don't want any part of that. I don't think it will ever quite get to that level. I think that because alcohol has this different cultural significance, and there's so many, France, Italy, who have wine, and, Scotland and all of these different places who have these huge cultural representations for alcohol. I don't think it will ever get to the level we have gotten to with cigarettes, but I think that people are going to be more mindful, and I think that people are going to start to have agency. And I think that the more people who choose not to drink, the more it will give a permission slip to other people to make that decision for themselves as well. And that's really, what I needed when I wanted to quit was a permission slip, someone to say it's okay. And that's what I've been doing for the past 7 years, just handing out permission slips all over the place. And I think the more that we hand out and the more that we have people replicating these permission slips, that the more people are going to feel comfortable with saying, hey, I just don't drink anymore. Whereas 10 years ago when I was starting this, it was very edgy to say that. And people would kind of wide-eyed look at you and kind of like your mom and then be like, oh, do you have a problem? And it will just be like, no, I don't. I just choose not to. And that will be okay. And people won't question it as much. And I think that's really a beautiful place to be as more of us decide that we're just not doing this, that it becomes a non-conversation, just like when you say you don't have gluten or that you're, whatever it is that you are abstaining from, that it will just be an okay conversation. So at least there will be that a little bit of that fear of what will people think of me will be taken away. And I think that will be and is starting to be really helpful for people in making that choice for themselves.
What cool things are you seeing in the marketplace that are just like wins for this alcohol-free lifestyle piece for people going out? And because like even at my birthday, I was like, we don't need booze.
That's all there was.
Like,
there was
so
all of these non-alcoholic beverages at your birthday. Yeah. It's so amazing what they've been able to do just in the past, I would say couple of years, that the flavor profiles and the sophistication of some of these drinks is really interesting. So you can get, ready to drink items that are like little mocktails in a can. You can get non-alcoholic wine that's actually wine that's been de-alcoholized, non-alcoholic beer that tastes spot on to whatever you drank before. And I think that's really...
Sorry, O'Douls.
Yes. Not sponsored by O'Douls. It's just really powerful to see all of these options coming into play because that wasn't available. And that, big alcohol brands are buying out these little boutique shops that really worked hard to create things, which I think is amazing when you're an entrepreneur and you can get, whatever the politics around it. I won't go into that, but that you're able to build this thing that you're really passionate about, and then it gets bought out and you know, can live a successful life. I think that's really cool too, that the alcohol brands are starting to see like, oh, well, we need to diversify. So we're going to go over here and talk to Sam, who made this drink, and put it in our portfolio. Like, it's just really cool to see the expansion of those brands and the availability. And not only that, you know, I grew up in kind of middle of nowhere Midwest, and I spend a lot of my summers in middle of nowhere of Idaho and go to a lot of like smaller places. I love a cute Hallmark town. And to go to these little places and see that so many of them, in places that you would think would not be this revolutionary, have one non-alcoholic item on the menu, so that you can go wherever you want and get this item. It's not just, you have to be, you know, again, 5 years ago, New York, Austin, LA, Chicago, these were the only places that you could find these options. And I was telling my clients like, hey, it's New Year's Eve. It's coming up. You got to get things mailed to you, because you won't be able to get these things in your area. And now it's at Sprouts and Target and Whole Foods, and it's super available that you can get these things that before it was hit or miss if you could get it, unless you lived in one of the big 5 cities.
Yeah, so cool. It's like no longer just like a Shirley Temple world.
For sure.
You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
mocktails. Well, we can put some fruit juices in a glass, or they're really like, people are going all out. And then also charging $14 for a drink that has no alcohol in it, where I'm like, okay, this is also hard.
Yeah, but the alcohol is the cheapest part of the drink. So, and you know that too. I mean, even though like there are some expensive alcohols, that's not, when you're putting like finer juices and all of these adaptogens and some of the things that are in these items.
Yeah, and
they're
the
also
higher quality
right,
things,
they're
for
higher
sure.
quality and small batch. I do want to address that, because some people, that grinds their gears. But if you're making something, because it's not so popular yet, like let's say a non-alcoholic wine, you're having to make that in a smaller batch. So of course it's going to cost more, right? And I can only drink maximum maybe 2 non-alcoholic beers before I'm like, whoa, this is hitting different, because your senses aren't dulled. So you taste all the sugar and the bloating or the, you know, the yeast, and you're still saving a lot of money, because you're not going to be able to drink nearly
You know, like
the amount that
pounding
you
6
were.
non-alcoholic beers.
Exactly. Yeah, your body just can't tolerate it. So I think it all evens out, even though the initial pain is like, oh, $14, dang. But yeah, it evens out.
Amanda and I are doing all this beautiful work in this field. So if any of my old alcohol friends are listening to the show, I know you're all bringing in. I'm watching you bring in all the non-alcoholic SKUs. Just let us know, because we really want to shout those out. And I don't know if you have allegiances that you want to talk about specifically, but I think that nobody is paying for me to talk about on the show any specific. But if there's any ones you want to shout out that you feel like are brands that are like to look for or great, or like taste flavor profile to you feel like wins.
Truly, all of the non-alcoholic beers, you honestly can't go wrong. They're so spot on that like it's just a really quick hit if that's something that you enjoyed as a drinker or would enjoy now. I'm very picky about sweeteners and sugars and all of those things and stuff. So a couple of my favorite, there's a small batch blend out of New York called Parch that I really like. They have like a smoky, I was a margarita gal, so I like a lot of like complex flavors. So they have like a smoky, spicy margarita that's pre-canned. And ooh, that's one of my favorite. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I like it. I'm like, you know that because I had those bottles of Woofer Estate or something out in the Hamptons, which is also like a smaller vintner vineyard out there, and it's like where I grew up. And somebody brought me that as a gift, and they're just like, it was so lovely to feel like I could have like a sparkling rosé that didn't have alcohol in it, and I was like so turned on by having that, because it was like back in the day there was some things that were like, this doesn't taste so great, and now I think people have done
really
a good job.
Improved, yeah.
Yeah.
And the sparkling rosés, I think that's another one that is a pretty spot on. Like, hey, this tastes pretty good. Reds, they're still working on, but they'll get there at some point.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. So it's out there. It's absolutely for anyone who's listening, explore, and then like always DM me. You know, I answer my own DMs and tell me what you're drinking.
Yeah,
tell me what you're drinking from non-alcoholic mocktails. Yeah, we want to know. I always like to kind of close out the show with a couple questions that are a bit more about like you and lifestyle, and just to getting to know you a bit more. And from the biohacking, wellness, and fitness landscape, just having you talk about maybe something that's lighting you up right now that's outside of the realm of what we talked about, that inspires you on a daily basis as a practice.
Ooh, I have done so many of the wellness practices that are all over the board. And just before here, I came from therapy. So we love a good therapeutic moment. And she and I were having a conversation because I have a lot of moving balls in the air right now. And just reminding me, sometimes you need someone to remind you to get back to basics. And one of my favorite basic tools that is always helpful for me, especially as someone who has kind of a spinny mind that can think a lot of thoughts at once, is EFT or tapping. And I think that that is one of my OG favorite things. And there are so many free resources online that really I love as a tool. I wouldn't say it's like lighting me up right now, but it's keeping me
It's keeping you grounded.
Right. It's keeping me grounded. And so that's always one that I really love. And something that's lighting me up that I haven't really explored, though, is I think for so long, so many of us did not have hobbies. And this is one of the things that I always ask the women who I work with, because so often drinking and socializing becomes our hobby. And we lose these little things, that activities that we do to spark joy and creativity and work with our hands. And I haven't found mine yet, but I think that that's really fun. And I love watching people like get into their like little craft, whether it's knitting or watercolors or whatever it is. I truly have not found mine, but I'm looking for it.
I feel like I'm starting to find mine. In the very scant few hours that I have, I've been making at home, I would call it hand lotion, or like a balm, a scented balm.
Okay, you've got a little apothecary brew
of like essential oils that I really love. And I've tried all these different brands and different things. And this brand makes this oil that I like the smell. And so I've been making this thing called Love Balm, which is like also like a poke at love bombing and like attachment style, as well as like BOMB, Love Bomb, but also BALM. And so that it is a riff on like an old perfume that was found and used in journey spaces and whatnot. And I was like, oh, I really want to put some oils together and make a lotion that's like, I give it to my one-on-one clients. My mom came to visit, I told you earlier, and I was like, Mom, I made you this. And it's just like something that resonates. And it also ignites your senses when you're like feeling like someone you love is there. I always make everyone, when I give it to them, I'm like, hey, put it on, or, right away. So there's like, we have a moment together.
Yes.
And then the hopes that scent will come back. And then to one of my friends, like for her birthday, it's just like a nice, I gave it to her. The next day she wrote me and she's like, can I eat this? It smells so good. And I was like, this is for your body, not for your mouth. I mean, you could probably eat it because I know what goes into it, but it's like, it's just something nice once a month I can sort of do in my kitchen, and I make like 12 units at a time. It's not like I'm like producing it, but
But it's like your sourdough, or your like whatever it is that you
like
get
my signature scent that I've picked, and like it feels really nice. So like I think, do you think that's coming back because like the parallel path to all the AI world, we need to be able to get back to crafts and hand goods?
Yeah, I think so, because I feel like I read an article, I don't know, a few years ago that like the tradesmen are coming back to be more popular. Like I can't even think of a trade, metalwork. Yeah, exactly. That people are wanting to learn these skills again because we're so tired of like looking into a screen. And I think that's so rad. I love it.
I love that. And then my final question for you is if you could go back and speak to 14-year-old Amanda and give her like one beautiful piece of advice that would help her just like lean into her like health, wellness, mindset, like her growth and human potential, what would that piece of advice be?
Yeah. I would tell her to be herself, and that is, authenticity is such a huge buzzword, but one of the reasons I decided to stop drinking originally is because I knew that I wasn't being my authentic self. And not just when I wasn't drinking, I knew it was like bleeding over into the other areas of my life. And I imagine it was right around, those pivotal years, your teenage years, where you start to put on masks, and especially if you're super sensitive and very empathic, that you start to show up how you think you should. And, everything worked out how it was supposed to, but I think I would just remind her that people love who you are, the eccentric, wonderful, wacky, unicorn version of you. And so just be her. It would have been so much easier if I'd have just done that from the start.
I love the eccentric, wacky unicorn version. That is you. That's here right now. Yay. Thank you for being on the show. Will you tell people where they can find you, where they can connect with you for coaching, whether it's like Instagram, website, all that? And then also, I'm assuming we can get your book anywhere.
Yes, anywhere books are sold. Unbottled Potential is my book, and I'm Amanda Kuda. That's Kuda. And I'm on Instagram, TikTok. Typically on Instagram is where you can find me. So if you want to slide into the DMs and say hello, I'd love to hear from you.
Amazing. Thank you for being here.
Of course.
I love you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you for joining us here on Well Power. You can submit questions, learn more, shop incredible brands, and connect with me at wellpower.life, or follow me on social at biohacking.breath.cold. From comfort to courage, friends, we're doing it. Any foul language you hear is not approved by my mother.